of the Valley Beth Shalom College of Jewish Studies and Americans for Peace Now. And we're delighted to welcome the leadership and activists of Americans for Peace Now. The VBS College of Jewish Studies offers college-level Jewish learning without quizzes, sororities, or football teams. And we invite all of you to come and participate. It's free, and there's always really good cookies. After tonight's presentation, next week, which is December the 7th, at our usual time at 7 o'clock, our guest is going to be Dr. Tal Becker, presented along with the Shalom Hartman Institute. Tal Becker is the legal advisor to the Foreign Ministry of Israel, and he is the senior negotiator. So when we talk about Israel's negotiations with the Palestinian Authority, Tal Becker is actually the person who sits down with the Palestinian Authority representatives and talks about the future of the two peoples. And he'll be our guest next week to talk about those negotiations, the region, the future of the region, a wonderful teacher and a wonderful speaker. Please come and join us. It's next week at 7 o'clock. And then the following week, on Tuesday night, now this is a change, but it's on Tuesday night, not Wednesday night. Tuesday night, December the 13th, our guest will be the journalist Peter Beinart. Peter writes for the Atlantic Monthly and has written some very sharp and powerful observations about Israel, America, American Zionism, American younger Jews, America and the new Trump administration, a very controversial and a very, very astute observer of the American Jewish scene. Please join us. That's on Tuesday night, the 13th, and again, everybody is invited, and there'll be cookies for everyone. That's our schedule, and then we'll be taking a winter break to celebrate the holidays. We'll come back in January, and I'll give you that schedule as we come back together. It's our tradition to do this as a community of friends, so I'll ask you please to rise from your seats, turn to the folks beside you and wish them welcome and hello.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Oh, you do this every time.
I mean, seriously.
Now, before you sit down, put your arms around your new friends and draw them close. We offer thanks to God for the opportunity to learn and grow together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And without any political aspirations or aspersions, we pray for peace together. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Please be seated. When I began my graduate education, would be 1975 here in Los Angeles, I took a course at the Hebrew Union College on advanced topics in education. And the course was held in the living room of Ruby and Jerry Dubas. So I drove to, at that time I think it was Hancock Park or some, where was Doheny? It was way the hell out someplace. And went to this beautiful home and met these two remarkable people who very quickly became heroes in my life. Ruby and Jerry stood for the very, very best of the Jewish people, for our optimism, for our faith, for our ideals, and for the sense of Jews, the obligation Jews have to cherish human persons, to cherish the human being we're talking to, the human being we share the world with, the human being who lives in our neighborhood, the human being who shares our homeland. That deep sense of ethics that came from them, from their deepest hearts, extended to their students, to their colleagues, to the community, to the whole world. That was expressed in their commitment to this organization, Americans for Peace Now. And they made dozens and dozens of trips to Israel in order to keep that dream alive. And even when there was practically nobody in the community who shared the possibilities of peace, Jerry and Ruby together preached it, lived it, talked about it, held it fast, and maintained it. Really heroes to me, and to all of us who have these Jewish ideals. Some years ago, a group of friends of Jerry and Ruby's got together and said we ought to do a lectureship in their honor. And they put this lecture together, and David Pine, who's the executive director, I want to thank David for all of his efforts in putting these lectures together. And all of those who have contributed, where's Louis? All of those who have contributed to this, your heart and your soul and your resources, all of those who have contributed, the Gunthers and Ellie, and all of those who have contributed to this and made it so very, very special. Tonight is the first Ruby and Jerry Bubas lecture without Ruby and Jerry. We've lost both of them to the world, but we haven't lost them to our hearts. And I'd like to ask your indulgence for just one moment, because these are my teachers and my heroes. And if I could ask you to rise for just one more moment. We have a special language for holding close those whom we love, those who have taught us, those who leave mine. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, v'yamad yivrach v'yutei, yamlich malchutei, v'chai yechon v'yomechon, v'chai yechon beit Yisrael, v'agalav b'zman karev yimromeh, yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach ve'olam ve'omayel, yivarach v'yishtabach, v'yipa'ar v'yitamam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei v'tusha v'yiku, ve'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tush v'chata v'nechem damiran v'yama v'yivru amen, yehei shmon arabah v'shemaya, v'chayim amen, v'yal kol Yisrael v'yivru amen, v'oseh shalom v'romah, v'yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yivru amen. May the source of peace in the world bless this community of nations, the community of humanity, with the peace that Jerry and Ruby so dreamed of and worked so hard for and held so fast to. May we all have peace and the sweet memories of all of their wisdom and their love. Thank you so very, very much. I want to welcome David, who's here with his wife, and in your honor, continue this wonderful tradition of honoring your parents and the learning that they shared with us. It is my privilege to welcome Jim Klutznick, who's the president of Americans for Peace, CEO, President Czar of Americans for Peace, who will introduce our program tonight. Thanks so much.
Czar, I'm not. Chair actually is what I am, and I'll let, whoops, is that? You can just turn your own. Oh, is that all? Yeah, that's all. That guy, so I'm not. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. First of all, let me say it's, as the chair of Americans for Peace now for the last 5 years, it's always been a pleasure to come out here, although it's poignant without Ruby and Jerry here, and having David and Elizabeth here carrying on the family tradition is very comforting, and to see them in the crowd. And I know they'll be here because I had parents like that also. So as David and I were talking about, you're not hearing me at all.
He said such nice things.
Oh, I said, I'm going to say them again because they're worth saying, because they're about, about Ruby and Jerry. I apologize. And I was just saying it was poignant to be here without them, but it was a pleasure seeing David and Elizabeth here carrying on the legacy of their parents. And David and I had talked about that because I had the same kind of parents. And it was a joy for both of us to have those parents. And hopefully they felt the same way about us, David. Most of the time, I think. Yeah, it comes. Also, I send regards from Deborah DeLee, who wanted to be here tonight with Laura. And I'm sure the rabbi will fill in just nicely for Deborah. and who actually is our president and our CEO. She's my boss, Rabbi, just to let you know. So I know the order of things here. You know, as the rabbi pointed out, when it came to putting APN together, and my boyhood friend Mark Rosenblum is here tonight, who is the founder, he knew where to go, and Jerry was the go-to guy. And so Jerry was not only a go-to guy to get this started, he was also a co-chair for a number of years. And when he did retire, this lecture was something that was done in his honor, and the partnership with Valley Beth Shalom took place immediately, and now we have this successful lecture series going on for how many years now, Rabbi? Does it go back?
5 years.
5 years. So, Jerry was no stranger to my family as well. My father met Jerry when he was a teenager. My dad was international president of B'nai B'rith back in the 50s, and Jerry up in Minnesota, Minneapolis, was, I guess, helping put a chapter together, and Dad had to come out there to bless it. And so our families go back a number of years. Most of you probably know about Americans for Peace Now by now. You know, we exist because of Mark back in the early 80s, decided that Shalom Akshav, our counterparts in Israel, our colleagues, decided it was time in the late 70s that Israel really concentrate on having peace. And it was around the time that Anwar Sadat reached out, and they felt that the Israeli government needed some support in that regard, and Mark felt that they needed some support in that regard. So I've been a member since Mark decided he wanted to do this, because even though I'm a couple years older than him, I've always felt he had some insights. He was a prescient guy, and I followed him ever since, and he and Deborah talked me into being chair a few years ago, and I don't regret it, and it's a pleasure to be involved in this. We just came back, Mark and I and Sandy Weiner, who's here, along with Deborah and about 15 other people, some of them we knew and we didn't know, just came back from Israel and meeting with the Palestinians as well. And the situation, which will be talked about here tonight, in light of the changing circumstances of the times, make it even more relevant for a Shalom Akshav to be supported. And so I ask you, please, don't abandon us at this time. Don't become discouraged. These times are going to force us all to work harder, and when we don't like something, don't be afraid to say it. In Israel, they have that problem as well, our Shalom Akshav people. So your support is very much appreciated, and we hope you will continue to support us strongly. I do want to do a little housekeeping here tonight. Some of their names were mentioned. We do have board members here, and so I'd like them to stand up as I mention their names. Steve Kaplan, who is the chair of this area of our region out here. We have also Sandy Weiner is here. Please, Sandy. Louis Leiner. And Dick Gunther. These people deserve a lot of credit for the hard work they've put in over the years for this cause. Now, I know you guys were expecting some other people here tonight. There was a fellow by the name of Daniel Levy, who's pretty well known, and I've heard him speak, and he's terrific. I think you got a better speaker. I think you have a better speaker tonight, quite frankly. And that's I'm not depreciating him in any way, but for this particular topic, there is nobody better than Laura Friedman. She is highly respected because of her background as a Foreign Service officer serving in Jerusalem in our consulate there, which is actually probably even more important than the embassies embassy in many respects, because it deals with the Palestinians and their issues. And we are very proud of Laura, who just recently gave testimony at a special session of the United Nations Security Council concerning settlements. And she did us and Shalom Akshav proud in that regard. So you're in for a treat hearing from her tonight. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Or actually, you guys are going to sit here, as I understand it now. Right. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. This is Laura Friedman. Why don't you begin
Hello.
by telling us exactly, like, what's your job?
Sure. And if you can't hear me, tell me, but I know you will. I almost feel like I should break out into folk song with this and maybe strum a guitar.
It's been done here, believe me.
Is there a way to make this sort of
Yeah.
done? All right. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here for the Bubis event. When I first joined Americans for Peace Now, when I was first considering coming to work at Americans for Peace Now, I read up on the organization. I read about Mark Rosenblum, the founder, and I looked at the board. And I come from Tucson, Arizona. I'm not really steeped in the Jewish politics of it. And I admit that I had to research various people involved in Tucson, Arizona. And we were a Reform congregation that I grew up in. I didn't know who Jerry Bubis was. And then I started reading, and I learned more and more about him and other board members, and I was greatly inspired and knew that this was a place that I wanted to work, something I wanted to be part of, and that I could be very proud of. And that has kept me there much longer than I ever thought I would be working on these issues. I found a home, and that's what brings me here today. So thank you, and I apologize. If I were Daniel Levy, you'd be listening to someone saying probably very similar things, but with a very charming British accent, which somehow makes them often seem much more intelligent. I don't know why. That doesn't seem fair. But I will say them with a Tucson non-accent, and they will seem harsh but honest, because that's what I am. Not harsh, but I'm direct. So my job, I'm the Director of Policy and Government Relations at Americans for Peace Now. I have a really fantastic job, which is I work for a board of directors who are incredibly committed to Israel, as I am, and who are incredibly principled. I use the word principled a lot when I talk about my organization, because it's a tremendous luxury to work in politics and to be allowed, to be required to be principled, courage of your convictions. If you look at our organization, sometimes people will say, well, but where would APN fall on? And you give an issue we haven't heard about before. And I say, well, I joke sometimes about the Paul Wellstone test. If any of you know who Paul Wellstone was, tragically lost, a senator from Minnesota. We used to work with Paul Wellstone a lot, and I learned very early on that what was remarkable about Paul Wellstone in the Senate was you could pretty much predict where he would end up on any issue, even if you didn't know yet, because he was so consistent in his principles. And Americans for Peace Now is very much that kind of organization. You can look at our core principles, you can look at what we've said and done over and over, and you can pretty much guess that no matter how much courage it takes, and no matter how alone we may be standing, very much like Jerry Bubis for early on, a long time being one of the only people talking about a two-state solution, we're gonna be there, and we're gonna say and do it, even if it's not necessarily politically easy. And we are going to be, in many cases, an Israeli friend of mine called us what do you call the thing that's on an island? I'm sorry, I have a fever, so bear with me. I came here sick, but we are like the light that keeps the ships from crashing. Thank you, a lighthouse. I'm from Arizona. We don't know from oceans. We're the lighthouse that keeps things from crashing on the shore. And we will be that as we go into this coming potentially much more difficult period, as we were for many, many years before two states was in vogue, before there was a peace process that people could hook themselves onto. So my job is basically to be the one in our organization who is out here meeting with you a lot of the time. My colleagues do it other times. We are engaging with the Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community. We're educating. We're hoping to inspire, particularly at times like this, inspire people to understand that peace is not just possible but necessary, and to mobilize them and empower them to find action where they can and to take action, which, again, at this time politically, I think is going to be something we're all going to have to work on and work harder on across all the issues we care about. That isn't any different for us than the normal operating procedures. So that's
Good. There was a piece published this morning in the Washington Post by the diplomat Dennis Ross. It's called "How Trump Could Surprise the World on Israeli-Palestinian Peacemaking." And he points out in the piece that every American president since Roosevelt has entered into the fray with the dream of making peace in the Middle East. And particularly the beginning of a term, each one of them enters office with this sense of, the other guys don't know what they're doing, but I'm going to get it fixed. And true to form, our new president-elect, who prides himself on his deal-making ability, has already announced that he's going to go over there and take care of it because nobody negotiates deals like he does. If he called you tomorrow morning, well, after your fever is gone, so maybe Friday, and called you and said, Ms. Friedman, what would you tell me about making peace in the Middle East? What steps should America take at this point to advance that process, that dream of making peace? What would you advise him?
Sure. Well, so I'm going to answer this straight. I'm going to take as part of your hypothetical phone call from the president-elect that this president-elect actually wants substantive advice and that I believe he might follow it. And I'm not even being sarcastic there. I don't know if that's true. I've seen nothing so far. I mean, half jokingly, my first piece of advice would be read the damn intelligence briefings that are being done for you that you're not reading. Because, here's a funny thing. The best allies within the U.S. administration, much like the best allies for peace now in Israel, are in the national security and intelligence community. That's always been the case. Any of you have seen the gatekeepers. You know this. All of the people who are in charge of Israel's national security, when they are able to speak publicly, they come out sounding like peace now. And it's not because we give them some Kool-Aid that brainwashes them at their goodbye parties. Your retirement party, drink the Kool-Aid, now you're with us. No, it's because if you understand what is really happening there, if you look at the real balance of interests, the real challenges that face Israel, you're going to end up where we are, which is not a starry-eyed kumbaya, let's get a guitar and sing and we'll all get along. It's a very pragmatic, this is what is necessary for Israel to have recognized defensible borders and a normal role in the region for Israel's sake. I believe from my experiences within the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. military community, he'd be getting similar advice from them. I hope he listens to it. Beyond that, look, I haven't read Dennis's piece. I won't comment on it without reading it. I will say certainly this president comes in, if he were truly, if he turns out to be sincere about wanting peace, he comes in with an interesting opportunity. He's not burdened with any advisors who have failed to make peace over and over and over. Pretty much every president who's come into power, certainly since the 80s, has been burdened with the same set, more or less, of advisors who are experts in how not to make peace. I'm sometimes criticized by my friends on the right. They say, we've tried it. You lefties, the two-state solution, we've tried it. It doesn't work. And my answer is, you haven't tried it. You've adopted the language, the rhetoric of it. I have yet to see anyone who's seriously committed to the two-state solution and the real effort it's going to require from the U.S. to actually be given a position of any influence on this issue. I would, if Dennis wants to come in and advise President Trump on how to make peace, then I'm going to be very dubious on where that goes. So he comes in unburdened by the weight of people who have failed over and over. That's great. He comes unburdened by any responsibility to any parties on left, right, or center for his election when it comes to Israel-Palestine. Nobody has any hold on him, so he has room to maneuver. And he comes in as someone who, at least in the very early days when he wasn't seeming to think politically, seemed to be pretty, I don't know. I know that many of us were concerned by the word neutral when he said he needed to be more neutral in negotiating peace. I don't know what he meant by neutral, but if what he means by neutral is, I want to go in there and help get a deal, and I'm serious, and I'm not going to spend 8 months on a learning curve getting jerked around by both sides with games they've played with every other president, I could see that as being positive. I think there are really important lessons he can learn from the failures of the past that successive presidents have failed to learn over and over with all the best of intentions. I don't know if this next president has the best of intentions. I know that there are lessons that he could learn that others have not learned. If he wants to do it, he certainly has the room to maneuver that previous presidents have not had. Kol hakavod, I hope he goes there. And we stand ready to give him really good advice if he wants it.
What are those lessons?
I mean, going back to what I said a second ago, one of the real frustrations, and it's not just with this past administration, with other administrations, there are a lot of good intentions, I think. You said, presidents come in, they're going to do this, they're going to spend political capital, which is fantastic. And then they get caught up in what is essentially the same game each time, with each party renegotiating what are supposed to be settled positions, each party sort of forcing a president to relearn everything that was learned the previous 4 years, the previous 8 years. Under the Bush administration, towards the end of that administration, we saw an extremely competent Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, reduced to negotiating with the Israelis over the removal of individual checkpoints in the West Bank. We had the status of a U.S. Secretary of State reduced to that. And the Obama administration came in with great intentions and saw our George Mitchell, our special envoy with incredible standing, reduced to bickering over what they were calling for a temporary freeze on settlements, not even removing a single settlement, and making this an issue that we would either, fall on your sword over sort of issue. These are lessons each president has failed to learn in time, and by the time they learn it, they have spent so much political capital, there doesn't seem any left to actually get to hard decisions.
So if Trump were to ask you then how I ought to approach the situation, and you would say, don't get caught up in these minutiae, and then his next question would be, are you telling me to impose a solution?
So, and I said, it's funny, I did this, I think Jim just mentioned, I testified at the Security Council about 2 months ago now, and my written statement is out there, and some people have read it, and people have watched the video. In the later part of it, there was a question and answer, and the question of an imposed solution came up, and nobody's paid any attention to the Q&A. And my comment there and my comment here was, nobody is calling seriously for an imposed solution. You can't impose a solution. Israel is a sovereign state. You cannot impose any solution on Israel. I don't recommend trying. The Palestinians are a people with legitimate demands, legitimate desire for self-determination. You're not going to impose a solution on them. What you can do is reinstate the law of gravity on both, the law of cause and effect, with things like, for example, settlements. It has been U.S. policy that we oppose settlement construction. That has been the U.S. policy since the outset of the settlement movement nearly 50 years ago. There has never been any consequence on Israel for settlements. And I'm not talking about sanctions here. There are a whole range of consequences short of sanctions. And by the way, people are suddenly sort of starting to talk about more tangible consequences that look more like sanctions. And that's fine. People can open that up. But we're at a moment now, 50 years into the occupation, when not only is the move not in favor of having the law of gravity, a law of consequences, it's about erasing the law of consequences entirely. You live in California. Your governor just signed into law legislation which, in its original form, erased the Green Line. I don't know if you guys know about that. In the name of fighting BDS against Israel, you had legislation that advanced pretty far in your legislature, which was aimed, really had nothing to do with BDS. It was about preventing boycotts of settlement products. And to do that, it effectively erased the Green Line for the purposes of California law. That didn't actually pass for a whole range of reasons. They signed something else into law. But none of that is really about BDS against Israel, because there isn't very much significant BDS against Israel to stop. That's about preventing boycotts of settlements. So we're at a moment now when the law of gravity must be reinstated for the sake of, if you ever want to have a two-state solution. And frankly, if I'm a president, I'm going to frame this, and if I were President Trump, I would frame this in terms of U.S. national security interests, which includes our commitment to Israel's survival as a state that is democratic and that has a Jewish character and that is in recognized borders that it can defend without apology. So that would be my starting point.
I think most people of goodwill who think about a two-state solution, I think the first question that comes to mind is whether or not there's the equivalent of peace now on the other side. Whether there's a Palestinians for peace now, and whether the Palestinian population is even in any way really interested in peace. Just last week, we had a lecture from the journalist Khalid Abu Tomeh, who told us that if you read the Palestinian press in Arabic, you read about a growing radicalization of the Palestinian population on the West Bank. He didn't even talk about Gaza. Just on the West Bank, a growing radicalization, a deep, deep delegitimization move against Israel, so that there's even less political will now to make a settlement with Israel, to make any concessions with Israel, than there ever has been before. Do you really think under those circumstances, this kind of a solution could be negotiated?
So I'd like to take apart that question a little bit. First of all, I ask all of you, okay, so I was born right after the occupation. I want you to imagine you have lived your whole life under occupation. You have lived the last 25 years under a peace process that was ostensibly about ending the occupation. And the occupation, if you're a Palestinian living in the West Bank, is not a hypothetical political discussion. It is your reality every single day. It limits your hopes, it limits your dreams, it limits your quality of life, it limits what future you see for yourself and your children and your children's children. Now, 25 years into the peace process, for people to be remotely surprised that Palestinian popular support for the political process is waning is shocking to me. On the ground, the argument to Palestinians that negotiations and diplomacy will deliver them an end to the occupation, that argument has zero credibility today. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that has zero credibility. You have had decades now, you have people born into a peace process, and all they have seen it deliver to them. And you can blame it on the incompetence of their leaders, you can blame it on Israeli policies, you can blame it on anything. But the fact is, all they have seen is a peace process that has gone on as their lives have gotten worse, as their settlements have continued to grow, and as Israeli politicians increasingly talk publicly about annexing the West Bank and annexing the settlements and not ever allowing a two-state solution. So the idea that there would still be popular, strong, I mean, when you do polling and you still see 51, 52% support the two-state solution, I find that encouraging and a little surprising. I'm surprised that anyone who's any younger than me still has any belief in the possibility of two states. I do believe, and this is where I would probably differ with the person you had last week, I was on the ground, I was a diplomat in Jerusalem in the early 90s. I was there when Oslo was signed. And I know that we went to bed one night, I lived, amongst diplomats and in locals, and we all went to bed one night, and we lived in a very binary world. Israelis considered all Palestinians terrorists, Palestinians considered all Israelis the enemy. The Prime Minister of Israel, they considered the arch enemy of the Palestinian people, and Arafat was the next Hitler. We went to bed one night, and that was the reality. And we woke up the next day, and Oslo had happened, and I can't even try to, for people who weren't there, it sounds so bizarre to say, things really did turn on a dime. And it's not because people started trusting each other more or liking each other more. It's because both people fundamentally want a normal life. There's going to be a percentage in every population, a percentage of extremists, and a percentage of people who, for ideological reasons, want a zero-sum outcome. But the majority of people, just like the majority of people here or anywhere, just want to have a normal life. They want to know that tomorrow has a chance of being a better day than today, and that their kids have a chance of a better future. And that's why as soon as Oslo happened, the majorities on both sides took a step back and said, okay, we're willing to give this a chance. Even if we don't entirely believe in the other side yet, we're willing to give it a chance. That has eroded enormously since 1993. I think it can come back if we ever get to a real possibility of an agreement. I think both sides, in very large majorities, will support it. The question of does it exist now, so the implication is what should we be doing now? And this is where I want to remind people, and Jerry can talk about this, Peace Now existed before there was a peace process. I want to be very clear. We supported a two-state solution before everybody thought it was cool and okay to talk two states. In fact, it was radioactive. Even if there's no Palestinian partner right now, and I don't believe that that's true, but if you want to say, for argument's sake, there's no one to talk to on the other side, there's no one to make peace with, fine. Let's accept that as being true. That doesn't mean Israel then has to go and continue with policies which destroy the very possibility of peace down the road. Israel is not obligated by the absence of a Nelson Mandela on the Palestinian side to steal more and more Palestinian land every day, implant more settlers there every single day, and undermine the possibility that 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, we can get to two states. Israel is not obligated to injure the body of Israel the way it is because the Palestinians have failed somehow. This is self-mutilation, and that can stop today, whether or not you believe there's a partner on the other side available right now.
And if it stopped today, and if the Israeli government would draw lines and say, this settlement, this settlement, this settlement, this settlement are illegal, and they'll be liquidated by the Israeli army in the morning. Would Abbas get up in the morning and say, I recognize the existence of a Jewish state of Israel, and I renounce violence?
So Abbas renounced violence more than a decade ago.
Then how can you keep naming
So that
squares
is
for terrorists?
okay. So we can go back and forth on this.
No, but seriously,
As far as
violence, you renounce violence. If you renounce violence in English, but in Arabic you name
That is-
town squares and schools for terrorists, you don't renounce violence.
all right, I wish I had an Israeli national security person from the gatekeepers up here to take that on.
No, I'm asking for Peace Now's position.
For Peace Now's position, we absolutely condemn and reject all incitement, and that includes what you're saying. But you know what? I condemn and reject it on both sides. I condemn and reject it when you name a square for a Palestinian terrorist, and I condemn and reject it when you celebrate in Hebron every year the mass murderer from the Ibrahimi Mosque, Tomb of the Patriarchs. It is a problem on both sides. It is a fundamental problem.
It's not the government of Israel celebrating that terrorist. It's a group of extremists who have planted themselves in downtown Hebron. The government of Israel responds very differently to terrorists. But let me answer my question. If Israel were to take those steps that you spoke about, would Abbas make similar steps on his side to advance the process forward?
I cannot say what Mahmoud Abbas would do. I would encourage you to get a speaker from the Palestinian Authority who could speak to you what Abbas would or wouldn't do. I wouldn't possibly speak for the Palestinian side. I don't know what he would do. I would like Israel to take these steps for Israel's sake. I actually don't care what the Palestinians do on this. I lived in Israel from 1992 to 94. During that period, I was responsible for the settlements portfolio. I drove around the West Bank every day. I met with settlers. I tracked where the settlements were. I looked at the size. That was the beginning of the peace process era. I go now with the eyes of someone who knew what the situation was on the ground in 1993. And in 1993, it was complicated. But you still had you could see how, what I'd learned since childhood, 67, Land for Peace, this incredible miracle of 67, which opened the possibility of Israel making peace with the Palestinians and with the Arab world by trading land for peace. In 1993, with the settlements there, and 100,000 settlers, it was already difficult, but you could see how it was possible. I look at it now when I go, and I see this incredible damage that 25 years of settlement has done. If you believe that Israel has a future as a state that holds on to the West Bank, that means that you do not care if Israel is a democracy, or you do not care if Israel is a state with a Jewish character. I care about both of those things. I want Israel to exist as a democracy with a Jewish character, within recognized defensible borders, with the entire world recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. That will not happen. None of those things will happen without eventually getting to a solution where Israel does not retain permanent control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The own goal, the self-damage that has been done by decades of settlement activity is in the way of that. And I don't care what the Palestinians do. I don't want Israel to stop injuring the body of the state of Israel as a favor to the Palestinians. I want to stop doing it because it's bad for Israel. This is not this sort of the friar complex. Well, we won't stop hitting ourselves on the head unless you do X. You're hitting yourself on the head. Stop hitting yourself on the head. It's not about them. This is about you. You're not punishing them by hurting yourself. That is the reason why I believe the settlement should stop now. That is the reason when you say declare some of them illegal and remove them, there's already more than 100 outposts in the West Bank. Those are proto-settlements that the Israeli government recognizes as illegal under Israeli law. Forget what I say, forget peace now, forget international law, forget the Palestinians. Under Israeli law, these are illegal. And for more than a decade now, the Israeli government will not move against them. So now we're losing Israel as a democracy, as a Jewish state, we're losing Jerusalem as the capital, and we're losing Israel as a state that respects the rule of law. Also, we can have more settlements to punish the Palestinians or to punish ourselves.
I appreciate that. I want to go back to the question, though. And the question is, I agree with you that the status quo is untenable. But there's something worse than the status quo, and that's to have ISIS in the West Bank. If there is no move on the Palestinian side toward Israel in some way, doesn't that negate the whole ambition of Americans for Peace now?
Okay.
Doesn't that negate the possibility of a two-state solution? If the radicalization of Palestinians is going to continue, and the solution to the frustration that you talked about is, well, Abbas will kill Abbas, or we'll retire him, and we'll bring ISIS to be our government, or Hezbollah, or Hamas. Take your choice. You know, there's not bad guys in the region. So the question is, at what point do you demand something of the Palestinians? All
right, so I don't quite understand at what point do you demand it? The Palestinians. So the Palestinians. No, that's fine. The Palestinians live under Israeli military occupation. I want to be very clear on this. It's not like they're living free in the West Bank and having a great time, and Israel standing by saying, when are you going to do something? So I don't quite understand that piece of it. Nobody is suggesting, not peace now, not Shalom Akshav in Israel, that Israel should get out of all the settlements tomorrow, pull the military out, wash their hands of it, and hope for the best. Nobody's suggesting that. And by the way, if you look back at the Gaza disengagement, which people will bring up as an example of why the left is wrong and you can't pull out of settlements, if you actually look at the record, Peace Now, my organization, and Shalom Akshav in Israel, we said this is really bad. Don't unilaterally disengage from Gaza. Don't just pull everything out. It's going to become a security nightmare. That's not the way to leave. If you can't negotiate, you have to negotiate security guarantees. You can't just pull out of there and expect it to work. It wasn't the left pushing for that. That was Ariel Sharon. As far as the question of what happens there, look, I believe, I've said already, if you have the possibility of a two-state solution, a genuine, concrete possibility available, it is not available today in the eyes of either people. I believe that if it becomes available, you will find the majority of people in both Israel and among the Palestinians are ready for it and want it and will support it. I believe that if you want to have a Palestinian leader who will be strong and empowered to deliver that, the best way is for Israel to adopt policies that says it's serious about it. Because when you say, at what point can we ask something from the Palestinians, I would point out it's not as if Israel is sitting by quietly and twiddling its thumbs for the past 20 years on best behavior. The number of settlers in the West Bank since the start of the Oslo process has more than doubled. I think it may have more than tripled at this point. We are talking about policies which are implicitly aimed at preventing the Palestinians from having certain land under their control as an outcome of a peace process. Don't forget the Ariel Sharon, the famous line, "Grab the hilltops." We actually have a phenomenon in the West Bank called the Hilltop Youth. They're named for that sentence uttered by Ariel Sharon. There's a peace process. Get out there and grab the hilltops. What we grab will be ours. What we don't will be theirs. We have a process here now where we have Israeli leaders going back, including under governments that were ostensibly pro-peace, who very clearly designed policies that were intended to obstruct a two-state solution. There are problematic statements and problematic behaviors on both sides. I will not defend problematic behaviors on the Palestinian side. I won't defend violence. I won't defend celebrating violence. I won't defend coming out against a two-state solution. These are all really, really bad things. I also will not defend really problematic statements, policies, actions on the Israeli side. And I'm going to be honest. I care more about the Israeli side. I'm not Palestinian. And I'm not a Palestinian advocate, but I'm someone who is fighting tooth and nail right now to keep alive the possibility. Forget even about the hope. It'd be great if all of you come out of here today feeling more hopeful about the two-state solution. I'm actually fighting to keep alive the possibility on the ground. So when I'm talking to people in Congress, or when I'm talking to students at a university, and they say, and these are Israeli, Palestinian, Jewish, Arab, whatever, and they say, look at this map. The only possibility is a binational state. Well, binational state means there's no Israel. Unless you're, I should be fair. If you're a far right-wing Israeli or Jew, let's say binational, one state. Because, it's interesting. I've been speaking to college groups for years. For years, I used to get attacked mainly from the right. You crazy lefties, what do you want? For the past 5 years or so, almost all the attacks come at me from the left, Jewish and Palestinian, saying, you're crazy. The two-state solution is dead. It's going to be one state. That's the only possibility. And what they mean by one state is the end of Israel. They mean a secular binational state, one man, one vote. I know what that looks like. I understand why that makes sense to them. For me, that's heartbreaking. That's not what I'm fighting for. And then I go to Israel and I talk to people on the right, and they say, look at the settlements. They say with a smile, two states are impossible. It's going to be one state. The Arabs can leave. Or maybe they can vote somewhere else, but they won't be citizens. It'll be fine. Well, I know what that looks like, and that looks like something that starts with an A. I won't support that either. I'm fighting tooth and nail here to preserve the very possibility of a two-state solution, not for the benefit of the Palestinians. It's great if it benefits them. I'm doing this for the benefit of Israel and the Jewish people who care about Israel.
I'm going to ask one more question in this way, then I'm going to move to a different topic. If that's what you want, and I do believe that It's what you do all the time, and that's admirable. Then when you speak to a world body like the Security Council of the United Nations, wouldn't it be important not only to call out Israeli obstructionist behaviors, but also Palestinian obstructionist behaviors? I read the transcript of your testimony. In 5 pages of single-space type, 1 sentence about Palestinian obstructionism, all the rest about Israeli. And this is not to a Jewish group, to a Zionist group. This is to the United Nations Security Council. Is that the way that you pursue peace?
So when I'm invited to speak on a specific topic, topic that I'm an expert on, I speak on the topic. The topic at the UN Security Council was, and I will quote, illegal Israeli settlements, an obstacle to peace and the two-state solution. The topic was settlements. I talked about settlements. I've been criticized by people for not talking about Palestinian violations of XYZ. I was brought in as an expert to talk about settlements, and I talked about settlements. I'm not going to apologize for that. Settlements are, at this point, the biggest, and it's entirely deliberate, on the ground, obstacle to being able someday, hopefully, to get to a two-state solution. And the amount of head-in-the-sand logic about this, the number of times I've been asked for years, why does Peace Now keep talking about settlements? Can't you talk about something else? Well, you know what? This is a fight over land. We are in a conflict over land. And the settlements are there to decide that conflict outside of negotiations. I object to solving this conflict outside of negotiations, either by settlements or by violence or by outside parties trying to impose a solution. Settlements are one of the ways, and the most tangible way, of trying to solve this outside negotiations, to impose an outcome. That's what the speech was about, and that's what we talked about. And by the way, again, for people who actually, I encourage you to watch the whole thing. Other issues came up in the Q&A afterwards, and we talked about them. Other issues came up in the press conference after, and we talked about them. In the amount of time I had, there was so much to cover on settlements, I barely scratched the surface.
Seems to me, and I'm just an observer from the outside, I'm an amateur and you're a professional, that you could gain a great deal more credibility with the mainstream of the American Jewish community if the answer to the UN's question was, yes, settlements are a serious obstacle to peace, and so is Palestinian obstructionism. It's not just an argument over land, it's an argument over culture. And I will present shall I say, a balanced presentation, because I object to the UN's presumption that the entire onus for this problem belongs to Israeli obstructionism. Seems to me you would gain a. I'm just I read your statement and I kept looking. I said she's going to get to it. I know she's going to get to it because she knows that it's not just about settlements. It seems to me that you'd get a lot more credibility.
I suspect there's no answer I can give you that's going to satisfy you, Rabbi. I think there is a false binary between the culture and the actual bulldozers on the ground and the laying of bricks. I would encourage you all, next time you're in Israel, to spend some time in the West Bank and see for yourself what is going on. In all of the years that I have been doing this issue, this meeting of the Security Council was, I believe, the first time they have ever brought in substantive experts to talk about settlements, ever. That is the first time in 50 years of the settlement project that they have looked at the substance of settlements.
But they've voted on settlement, they've condemned settlement activity for the last 50 years since the war.
The last time that there was an actual UN Security Council resolution dealing with settlements was 1980, sir.
Okay, how many General Assembly resolutions condemned Israel?
This was Security Council. I wasn't talking for the General Assembly. The Security Council, which is the body that actually has the authority and that acts within the weight of international law, this is the first time they have taken up the substance.
Okay.
I am very proud to have been invited. I would encourage you, the testimony is online. You can read it for yourself. You can watch the video, and I encourage you to draw your own conclusions. The challenge for me when I talk to groups about this, and I've got to say, after years of doing this, I still find it baffling. The idea that, I'm trying to think of the nicest way to phrase this. I understand the idea of balance. I come here unapologetically. I come to any forum, including the UN Security Council, as an advocate for Israel, as someone who comes at this starting point, my starting point being defending Israel and making the case for Israel. The idea that balance means for anything that I raise that is an issue with Israel, I have to find something bad to say about the Palestinians, as if it changes what I'm saying about Israel. As if it somehow, there is nothing, again, I'm not a Palestinian advocate or a defender. I actually don't care when I talk about settlements what the Palestinians do. There is nothing that the Palestinians can do which in my mind justifies the damage Israel does itself with the settlement enterprise. These are unrelated. It is a false binary. I want Israel to stop building settlements because they're bad for Israel, not because the Palestinians have done something good and deserve a cookie.
Jimmy Carter published an editorial in the Washington Post recently, arguing that the United States should recognize a Palestinian state, and this should be Obama's sort of last gift to the region. Do you think this is a good idea?
No, I mean, I don't think we as an organization have taken a position on that specific suggestion. I'm sorry, I've been sick for 2.5 days and apparently have missed a whole bunch of op-eds.
A lot of good news.
Sorry about that. The challenge of the idea of, recognizing, it doesn't actually do anything. If President Obama, there was a period when there was a lot of excitement around the possibility of, whether there be one final peace initiative, and there's still talk about possibly something in the UN Security Council, and that's interesting. I'm increasingly doubtful, but I'm still hopeful. Maybe we'll see something, just a reiteration of longstanding policy that hasn't been reiterated since 1980 by the Security Council. I think that would be positive. But recognition, could be rolled back the next day by the next president. I don't think it really achieves much in it. I think it would be a red flag in front of the right wing in Israel. I don't think it's necessarily the most effective thing he could do, no.
You said you spend time on college campuses. The news that we receive is pretty dire, that Jewish kids, pro-Israel kids on college campuses have a very hard time. There's a very strong BDS or anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, sometimes anti-Semitic kind of theme tone on American college campuses. Is that what you've been finding?
I think it depends on the campus. I talked to a lot of kids. I certainly have not been to any campuses where kids were, really expressing any sort of fear. There's certainly a much, compared to when I was in college, or probably any of you were in college, it's certainly a more heightened political atmosphere, for sure. But, the current generation, and I stand in awe of the kids today. I've got to be honest. We were talking about this earlier. I really am in awe of the generation of kids that are pro-Israel on campus today. You have a generation which is far more knowledgeable than certainly my generation was when we were taking this issue up on campus, partly because they just have access to so much more information than we did. And they are knowledgeable and they are courageous. And in most cases, I see them trying to reach across the aisle, so to speak, and build bridges where they can. And that includes with the people who aren't pro-Israel, where there is absent anti-Semitism. When there's anti-Semitism, I'm sure that's impossible. But I've been to a lot of events where you have, a joint event organized by some Jewish groups, and then a Palestinian group, or where there's a lot of kids there from one of the Palestinian BDS groups who, fine, they ask tough questions, but they show up. And that's important. That's what a campus is for. It's for debate. It's for challenging. And, my argument is I want to talk to the BDS kids because I think I've got good answers. I mean, I've said to BDS crowds before, if you're supporting BDS because you hate Israel and you want to kind of metaphorically punch Israel in the face, then I'm not going to talk you out of it. But I think a lot of the kids there think they're supporting BDS because they think it's a good tactic to get Israel to change its policies. And in that case, I have something to say to them because I think it's the wrong tactic. If you're interested, if your actual goal is to help end the occupation and change policies, then let me talk to you about better ways to do that, ways that I think are more effective and that build common cause across a whole range of groups. And I've had, I think, I would say very good responses on campus in that discourse.
Why is it a bad tactic?
If the goal is to change the policies, I think it drives away allies. I think it causes many people to circle the wagons. I think it allows those who want to say this is about hating Israel and hating Israel and anti-Semitism to put you in a box and dismiss your activism and delegitimize it. And beyond that, and I don't know where people are in this room, my organization for many years, and we did this alongside Peace Now in Israel, we say don't boycott Israel, boycott settlements. If you want to show that your policy, that your activism is about the settlements, is about the occupation, then target your activism clearly. And I've heard people, one of the responses I get from students is, well, that's completely artificial and manufactured. The settlements are created by Israel, they're supported by the Israeli government. How can you draw that line? And my answer is fine. It is artificial and manufactured in that sense. I'm looking for the tactic that's the most effective. And I can tell you, boycotting settlements, targeting the occupation is very effective. That's why in places like the California legislature, we have efforts to legislate against it under the guise of blocking BDS. Because activism targeting the settlements is very scary to people who want to say there's no difference between Israel and the settlements. The Green Line doesn't exist. There's no occupation. The God-given land of Israel goes from the river to the sea. And if you dare distinguish between the different parts of it, you're an anti-Semite. Distinguishing between the two parts of it clearly works very well. So we have a better tactic, and it's a proven tactic. And you don't need to boycott Israel.
I'm confused about that last answer. Could you help me understand that last answer? I think the other side would be that once you open the door to any kind of boycotts, you're going to go back to the anti-Israel boycott. First of all, because it's hard to identify a product that's made in the settlement and not in Israel proper with some kind of participation. And second of all, that once you open that door, you open the door to all kinds of boycotts and divestment. Isn't that true?
I think the slippery slope argument, I understand where it comes from. I don't buy it, partly because we've been endorsing this policy for years now, and that hasn't been the issue. The issue is that Israel doesn't want people boycotting the settlements. I mean, fundamentally, there is a clear distinction. And I mean, we have things like the European Union, France last week. I mean, let's talk about differentiation. Forget even boycotts. France last week called on companies to properly label products coming from the West Bank, from settlements, that they have to label them, consistent with EU policy. And the Israeli government is acting like this is an anti-Semitic Nazi tactic. I mean, Michael Oren has used language bringing back memories of the Nazis. This is just labeling. This isn't a boycott. Now, as I said in a tweet, every country in the world under international trade regulations is required to accurately label the point of origin of their exports. That is a requirement for international trade. But apparently, settlements are going to be the one place in the world where that's not going to happen. Because the settlements not only can you not boycott them, they deserve special protection. I have a problem with that. That's about normalizing occupation. I have a problem with that. I have no problem saying, see all those companies that they want to get special treatment and special protection? Those are the products that if you support Israel, you don't support the occupation, you don't buy those products. I don't have any problem with that. None at all.
Okay, I want to thank you for your answers to all these very good questions. And, I want to respect Ms. Friedman because she's not feeling well, so we're going to end a little early tonight without a break. But I do want to give the congregation a few minutes to ask a few questions. Before we begin this part of the program, Louise is the keeper of the mic, and she's going to be the one who decides who gets to ask questions, and she's all-wise and all-knowing. I want to remind you that at Valley Beth Shalom, a question consists of a one-sentence interrogatory which begins with the words what, where, why, when, and how, and ends with a question mark, and elicits an answer however long she decides from our guest. If you would like to make a speech about your vision of peace in the Middle East, we're delighted to have you do that. Meet at Genesta Park on Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, and there'll be a whole group of people there that will be listening to you. Who has the mic? Bakasha, please.
Okay, it's the question. I'd like you to clarify your conflating of occupation and settlements going historically from the Brits to the Jordanians to the Israelis, in 67, and the fact that France includes East Jerusalem, which includes the Old City, as settlements.
Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. Please.
Sure. So one of the fun things about working in an area of politics where history goes back to literally the beginning of time is that you always have to, you can argue about what your definitions are, what maps you're using, because literally the maps go back thousands of years, the lines, I get that. When I use the word settlement, I'm using it in the way that U.S. law does and international law, which is taking the 1948 armistice line, which is also called the 67 border. So everything that is on the wrong side of that line, east of that line, is a settlement. A settlement is any place where Israel has built civilian, not military, civilian communities east of the armistice line. That is a settlement. And for the purposes of international law and U.S. law, not just France, that includes East Jerusalem. That's about the armistice line. It has nothing to do with what Israel can or cannot keep in a peace agreement. I say this to my friends when we argue about whether or not areas of East Jerusalem like Pisgat Ze'ev should be called settlements, or Gilo, which everybody knows Israel will keep. And my answer is fine. It'll keep it. That's part of negotiations. It negotiates to keep it. But the term settlement is a technical term referring to where it falls on the map with respect to the 1948 armistice line, 49 armistice line. That's it.
According to David Mikovsky, who studies these things, about 80% of the settler population lives in that small strip that's just against the line. And that sort of indicates where a potential border might be with land swaps.
Yeah, no, I
recognize that as well.
What's that matter of recognizing? I mean, I worked with David on some of those maps. If you look at the way the settlement enterprise has gone over the past 50 years, the vast majority of settlers live in, it's not just along the Green Line. The Armistice Line is also called the Green Line, also called the 67 borders. It's called the Green Line because it was drawn in green. It's that technical of an answer. Most of the settlers live either very near the Green Line or in basically what are called settlement blocks. What is challenging about David's maps from when he did this project, I think 5 years ago, and even today where they've changed, is that those settlement blocks are not legally defined by anyone. So Israel says, and I went into detail on this, by the way, in my UN speech, if you want to read about it. Essentially, you've got areas that people say, well, everybody knows Israel will keep these areas, so it should be okay to build there. What's the problem? And the problem is that these blocks keep growing and growing. So if in 1994, when I was still covering this, you could look and say, okay, I can see how this area could be incorporated into Israel relatively easily and still leave a potentially viable Palestinian entity on the other side. It gets harder and harder to do that today when some of the blocks stretch, if you include Ariel, the settlement of Ariel, you've got a finger that stretches more than halfway across the northern West Bank and cuts it in half. If you include all the settlements around Jerusalem, you cut off the north and south part of the West Bank completely from each other. So it gets more challenging. But the bottom line is that based on, if you go back to like the Geneva Initiative, This is when the Track 2 initiative, when Israeli and Palestinian, either current or former officials got together and in good faith negotiated a model agreement. And you look at what they got to, you can still get more or less to that agreement and keep most of the settlers as part of Israel. Not most of the settlements, but most of the settlers. Absolutely.
Is there a point of no return?
It's fun. That's a question we get a lot, both the right and the left. It's true. I mean, it's a good question. For me, because...
And how close are we to that point of no return?
Yeah, after, the 1 minute to midnight, 1 minute after midnight. Look, I believe the only thing that ends the conflict is a negotiated solution that ends up with an Israeli state and a Palestinian state side by side, whether that's now or in 20 years or 50 years. The question really, each time, the longer it goes, the harder it gets. If you say, well, it's a tipping point, we can't get there anymore, you're essentially saying that we're giving up on Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and we're giving into eternal conflict. So there will never be a tipping point in which I say, I'm giving in to giving up on Israel and giving into eternal conflict. I'm just not. Beyond that, I don't believe eternal conflict is going to be acceptable to either people. At that point, it becomes how much conflict do you have to have before once again we get to a moment like we had in 1993, where you've got leaders who are courageous enough and peoples on both sides who are exhausted enough that they recalibrate their expectations and their willingness to negotiate, and you get back to where we are now. So I don't believe there's a tipping point in that sense.
Okay. Who has the mic? Please.
Okay.
Al.
How can you believe that at a two-state...
Put the mic right up to your mouth.
Like that?
Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
I agree with you on the settlements, but how can you believe that a two-state solution is currently possible in the near future when Barak gave almost everything that they wanted, and what he got was the first intifada, and then Olmert gave even more, and Abbas said, I'll get back to you, and never did. And every time there's a strong Palestinian against Abbas, they have to leave the country or they'll be killed.
So without taking on bit by bit everything in your question, because I actually don't agree with every part of your premises, but I will stipulate that right now, I don't believe a two-state solution is available, right now. I don't believe that the Palestinian leadership right now has the credibility to deliver, and I don't believe right now that there is an Israeli leadership that has any interest in delivering. All that being said, I still think Israel has to stop these body blows it's giving to itself with settlements, with policies that make a two-state solution impossible down the road. I reject, and I'm not saying you're saying this, I reject the logic that says, well, if there's no Palestinian part right now and there's no two-state solution available, then we have to keep building settlements. And if that means that someday we foreclosed completely. I know you're not saying that. Yeah, no, I know you're not saying that at all. But I don't believe right this moment there's any possibility of a two-state solution being implemented now. I do believe that can change quickly. Nothing will credit a Palestinian leadership like Israeli policies that indicate a readiness to actually negotiate a two-state solution. I don't know if it can be Abbas. I don't know if it's the next person after Abbas. I'll tell you, I have friends who always bring up, Barghouti. Israel can let Barghouti out of jail. And I say to them, that's interesting. I want to remind you, you get to let Barghouti out of jail once to be the leader you deal with. If you treat him like you treat Abbas, I think you probably have let out the next leader of the next intifada. If you treat him like someone you're actually going to make peace with and change policies, maybe he could do it. But frankly, if you're going to do those policies, you might be able to do it with Abbas.
So I know that everybody from Tucson is a mind reader, and I'm going to ask you to read a mind for a moment, which is the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, knows everything, I presume he knows everything you know about this, and he knows the demographics, and he knows the problem of democracy, and he knows the problem of maintaining a Jewish state. And I don't read him as a far rightist who's hoping that he'll wake up one morning and all the Palestinians will disappear. What's his thinking right now about this situation? What's his ambition? What's his aspiration? as you read the situation?
I learned a long time ago that I am on firmer ground when I do not ascribe intent to other people. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what Bibi wants. And I learned a long time ago, I keep quoting my mother on this. My mom told me a long time ago, she was talking about men, and she said, it's great to listen to what they say, but watch their feet. And I have found that to be those incredibly wise words. So I don't pretend to know what is in Bibi's heart. And I don't really care. I have watched him now. He's now, I've watched him as prime minister long ago, and I've watched him now over and over. He's now the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history. We've had a lot of experience with his policies. So I'm going to judge him on his policies and his actions, not on what I think is in his heart. And what I see in his policies and actions is someone who is enacting policies that are detrimental, if not fatal, to Israel's future as a Jewish state and as a democracy. I don't know if he's doing that because that's his ideology. I don't know if he's doing that out of sort of political opportunism. I mean, let's be honest. Right now, he is the left flank of his government. If I were Bibi Netanyahu seeing the election of Mr. Trump, I'd be worried because Bibi's been able to count on Obama for the past 8 years being that one friend. He's like the drunk guy in the bar, and there's the big guy over there, and he's saying, hold me back, hold me back. And he always had Obama to hold him back, while his other drunk friends were urging him forward. I don't think he's going to have anybody holding him back now. I'm not sure that that's good news from his perspective. But judging on his policies and his actions, I believe he's leading Israel to a place that is neither Jewish nor democratic. And I want a stronger effort by those of us who care about Israel to stop that.
Who's got the mic? Please.
I have a question. How are you different from J Street? And have you looked into joining with other groups that maybe are taking a little bit different route to find a way to work out the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? We had a...
That's a great question.
Okay.
Louise,
Okay.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. So we work very closely with J Street. We have a great deal of overlap in our supporters and in our board members, and I probably spend more time talking to J Street U chapters than maybe any other speakers in the area.
That's the J Street on campus organization.
Which is tremendous, by the way, absolutely tremendous. We have a lot of overlap. I think, we're different in a number of ways. One is that we are the American sister organization of the Israeli peace movement. So we are not simply an American organization. We are organically connected to those on the ground who are fighting this battle. A question was raised a while ago, when I spoke at the Security Council, why were you invited? And I said, well, I like to think it's because I'm just so fabulous. They said, we want Lara Friedman. But fundamentally, they invited us because we're the experts on settlements. And that expertise is directly linked to the fact that the Peace Now movement, Shalom Akshav, has Settlement Watch, which is the preeminent organization tracking settlements for decades. So that I would say is the fundamental piece of it. As far as organizationally, look, we all occupy different pieces of the spectrum. Our organization is not always in exactly the same place as J Street. I think we sing in harmony a lot of the times. Things like settlement boycott is one of the places where we are not in exactly the same place, and I'm proud of our organization and our standing. I think that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for cooperation between groups, and we do that already. I hope that we will do more of that going forward. If you have groups that you want to suggest, please let me know, or let us know.
Good. We want to thank Lara Friedman for being with us tonight. I want to thank Americans for Peace Now for making this evening possible, and the Bubis family once again for allowing us to honor your parents. And to all of you, thank you for coming tonight. Sorry? Next week. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Be careful going home.